Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a review of The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This is going to be a very short video because I didn't finish the book, but I still feel the need to talk about my feelings about this book because I was so frustrated. This book is very beloved and I think it's got a very high rating on pretty much any kind of review site, and whenever you hear the majority of people talking about it, it's talked about very, very positively. A lot of the things that I heard about it were that the character, our main character, is kind of quite a cozy character. You kind of just want to give him a hug because he's trying to figure things out. And I also heard that the writing was really solid and the politics in particular was amazing because we're essentially following a character who's being thrust into a very senior role in society and he's trying to figure out the lay of the land. And with that, you typically get somebody who's trying to understand, like the political landscape, the societal and cultural landscapes as well on top of that. And that's the sort of stuff that I really, really love. So I've been wanting to read this book for quite a while. It's also a standalone, so there's not like a huge commitment to it, though there are other books set in this world. So if you are a big fan of this character and this world, you also have that option to go and try out some of Catherine Addison's other books. I was so disappointed when I read this book because when you open the book, the glossary is gigantic. It's huge. There are like hundreds of names. And I'm normally okay with that. Normally, I just kind of have to accept that I'm not going to know who's who for a large part of the book. And if they're important enough, I will be reminded by the author who they are, what their standing is, and what role they're playing. I got this quite a lot in Baker's books. Baker's world has a lot of characters in it. And even though there's a lot of characters in it, he does a really good job of making you remember who is who, where they are, what they're doing. And like, he does a particularly really good job of like elevating the right characters at the right time so it doesn't feel very overwhelming. That does not happen in this book. This book does a really poor job, in my opinion, of reminding the reader like who really matters, who we should be paying attention to. And I think that is a skill, and I realized that's a skill after reading this book because it was so frustrating to read that it got to the point where I was about 10% in even, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to have to just admit to myself that I don't really know who is who and what is what, and I'm going to have to kind of hope that by the end of it, I kind of know what's happening. And unfortunately, I stopped reading at about 45 to 50%. Even by that point, I was completely lost. I am all for authors treating their audience as intelligent. I love that. Baker does it, Abercrombie does it, Parker does it, Abraham does it. A lot of my favourite authors, Ursula K. Le Guin, she does that. A lot of them do this, but I think there is a point at which it becomes very unpleasant to read and it starts to feel like a chore for the reader to constantly have to go back and forth to remember who is who and what is what. It's just too much, right? And I know I've heard people talk about this in like Malazan and things like that, but with that I expect it. I expect it with Baker as well because these are huge worlds with multiple books and they're very expansive and each book builds on the other one. This is one book and yet it managed to do what like Baker like didn't do, right? And I think that's quite an achievement, but not necessarily in a good way. So the character list is way too long. It's too much, I think, for like a person to find enjoyable, in my opinion. The other thing that I found quite frustrating to read, and again, bear in mind, I did only get to kind of the 45-50% mark, which is half the book in my defense, but the politics in this book I don't think was done that well. And I think it's a part of the problem which I've just mentioned, which is that there's just so much happening that even though it's quite a quiet book in the sense that there's not a lot of action, like there's just so many threads that you have to keep an eye on that the politics becomes less enjoyable as you get introduced to more and more characters because you're not able to remember or kind of tie the pieces together in the way that you would in a normal book because you're not being given that nudge from the author about who matters and what matters at this particular point in time or at this particular point in the book. It made the book feel very just unpleasant to read. I think it's been a very long time since I've found a book this unpleasant to read. And that's saying something because I've read some pretty unpleasant books in the last year, 2 years, 3 years. And I think this has got to be up there as one of the most unpleasant books I've ever read. It just felt like a chore it wasn't enjoyable. And even though I quite liked our main character, I found him quite tiresome to follow after a while, because I know he's supposed to be, or I think he's supposed to be, this really like cute and like cozy character that you're following and that you can relate to if you were in this situation. But I actually found him to be quite annoying and irritating about 20% of the way through, because he wasn't picking up on certain cues that maybe he should have been. And he was asking really silly questions, in my opinion, that anybody with some modicum of intelligence would be able to deduce from just looking at the world around them and observing the people around them. Like, I get it. You want to create somebody that's relatable and cute and that, like, you know, people want to hug or whatever, but like not to the point where you start feeling really frustrated with this character because they're doing stuff that doesn't really make sense and that is really dumb, and like the guy like needs some help, basically, is maybe that's the point that she's making. But I feel like from the reviews that I read and the people that I've spoken to about this book, I don't feel like that's the case. I could be wrong though. So overall, like, I just found this book highly, highly unpleasant to read. Highly, highly unpleasant to read. It's such a shame, because I really wanted to like this book. I really wanted to be able to say that this book was one of my favorites, because so many of the features that a lot of people talk about in this book are features that I like in the books that I read, and I just think that's such a shame. A lot of my Patreons, I think only 2 of my Patreons have kept on with reading this book. The rest of us decided not to continue. A few didn't even bother starting after seeing the glossary, because again, it gives you that indicator that this book is going to be a lot of hard work. And whilst I'm happy to do that for certain series and certain books and certain authors, I think when you're looking at this book in isolation as a standalone and as a world that you're not really needing to commit to that much, I just don't feel like the chore is worth it for one book. I don't really like rating books that I haven't finished, but if I had to give it a rating, I'd give it like a 1 or a 1.5 stars, because it was just highly, highly unpleasant to read. The most awful reading experience I've had. I tried so hard to keep pushing through. It's very, very rare that I DNF books. And yeah, I just had to DNF this book because it was absolutely awful. It was so unpleasant. So I'm really curious to hear from people who did like this book, and also who maybe didn't have a great experience with it, because I feel like we are in the minority. Feel free to comment down below regardless of what side you're on, but I'd really be curious to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to continue the conversation down below. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know this is a short video and it's a bit of a rant, but I just had to get my thoughts out there. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.